Hey, it is technically 11:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I wanted to welcome everyone to another seminar speaker series. You can see it's mixed media, so we have folks online. I see you all, thank you. And we actually have some people in the room this time, which is nice. So I'm going to introduce our speaker this week. I'm very happy to introduce our very own Professor Gabriela Ora Mendez, who's going to share her work with us again for those of us that didn't see her. So I'm very excited to see that. She's coming to us from Vanderbilt, and her work integrates queer theory and decolonizing methodologies to pursue an intersectional, multivocal queerization of academics. And much of that work uses ArcGIS and spatial analyses. She's got some publications. Of course, she's got one coming out in ethnohistory, I see. Revista Española de Antropología Americana. Of course, she's got various co-authored chapters in volumes. She's been funded very well through Peruvian National Space Agency, various funding from internal, external. So she's been busy. She's got a lot going on, and she's going to share her work with us in her talk entitled Redefining My Archaeological Practice Through Queer Lenses. And she's here in person, so I'm going to just load up her talk and let her get into it. If you are virtual, please mute yourself and feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll field them at the end. And then, of course, anybody here in the room, you can feel free to just speak if you'd like. So I'm going to share her presentation here with everyone. Get her started. Take chair. And before she comes up here, we can all just give her I don't know how to do the emojis to do they moved them on me to do the emojis, the little hand clap thing. All I've got is this.
She's getting a lot of them up there.
Okay, there they are. So other people. Okay.
Standing O, Gabrielle.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for being here. Lisa, thank you for the introduction. As you're saying, my talk is titled Redefining My Archaeological Practice Through Queer Lenses. And before anything, this week we are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. Today and tomorrow, we are celebrating National Coming Out Day. Now, it's a very personal decision that has to involve family support, security, but also we encourage the people who is willing to do that to share themselves with us. This is the abstract you came here today for. As a discipline, archaeology is undergoing a self-critical reflection. Inclusivity, diversity, multivocality, accessibility, and the acknowledgment of colonial practices within the field. In addition, archaeologists are reflecting on the impact on how we practice archaeology, types of research questions we get to ask, and how and who is asking them. A context, a link into queer theory, to redefine the way we approach archaeology, from the research approach to the methodology to the interpretation. I reflect on how the future might look, and how this transformation is happening, how it's pushed by personal stories. In that context, these are the topics I'm going to talk today. Self-critical reflection, how we practice archaeology. These are the questions I've been asking myself for the past some years.
So sorry to interrupt you. I left a right here last class.
So, first of all, and what it gives the idea to this talk is self-critical reflection. We have been taught one way of doing archaeology. We analyze ceramics, we analyze bones, we analyze we analyze a bunch of things. We describe them, put them in boxes, real boxes and actual real typologies. Then we tell a story. And that story is heavily influenced by our background, our baggage. our personal history, by the cultural context we are living today. And sometimes things get in the way of really understanding what we are looking for, because remember that we're archaeologists, we're reconstructing the past with material culture. We're not interviewing people, talking to them, and because of that, our own set of tools and our set of our own baggage influence the way we. There's no way around that way of pursuing research, at least in social science. You write what you know. In that sense, we have forgotten to discuss some issues within the discipline. Diversity. Notice how we are very privileged people, usually European descent from all over the world. We tend not to, tending not to talk with the communities we will work with. At least I was guilty of that. But we need to remember that our interpretations, our analysis, and our methodologies should include different voices, should include accessibility. I'm talking about our colleagues that have the different challenges to go to do archaeology. And we need to acknowledge the history of our own colonial practices that we have inherited and we need to transform. So these are the questions we should be asking ourselves, besides putting together the research question, that is like our big thing. We also should ask, where are we going as a discipline? What type of stories we want to tell? We need to pass that with our own research interests. We need to think, what is the impact having the communities we're in? And just one detail there to imagine really how we can impact people with very good intentions. There was this archaeological project, they were hiring people. And most of the men were working in fields, were working somewhere else, so they started hiring women because this archaeological project was very egalitarian. So they hire women, they pay the women, and then the women give the money to their husbands because that's what happens in their household, that's their decision. And the husband will use it in other different extracurricular activities. So the female archaeologists, and this happened 15 years ago, decided to empower the women. It's like, this is your money and you keep it, and I'm all up about that. But then the male end of the town, they didn't want their wives to go work with the archaeologists. Nobody was working there. And so we need to be careful what's our impact, not only talking from a very strict archaeological perspective, but the reconstruction of history of other people. But we need to think these things very carefully in order for our own research to be like a whole package. We cannot work in that sense. Who is doing the archaeology? Who is taking those questions? Who is getting the money? Who is interested, especially in those questions we're going to ask when we pursue our own research? And for many years, this person was doing archaeology. It was doing the archaeology, as I like to say. White men, because they're athletic, they're strong, and we all have the image of Indiana Johnson. But then, the discipline, the world of academia opened itself up to women. Then some of us arrived to the academia, to archaeology, and that was great. And that changed. That started the discussion about gender archaeology, feminist archaeology. That started a discussion about household archaeology, and all these terms are very related. We are very gender. Then we cannot stay this monolithic, dualistic way of doing archaeology. We need to think that sometimes our colleagues come from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities, and with different challenges. And then another example for that is this it's not announcement, this description of the archaeological major in an ex-university. The ex-university student profile for future archaeologists is that we need people with physical resistance and a taste for working outdoors. Essential when practicing applied archaeology. They're right. You need to, but we all not go to the field. We all know like our outdoorsy person. That it sounds weird, but a bunch of us work in labs with computers, and the amount of field work they do, it's that there's different ways of practicing archaeology. We need to remember that when we are taking students to the field, when we are arriving to a place to do research. Because when we push those characteristics on our students, our peers, our colleagues, we stop seeing them. And we stop seeing people from different abilities. We stop seeing weird people. We stop seeing everyone that is not us. We stop seeing it. Because that's the ideal of the archaeologists. And it's an idea that came with the work, came with the job. But now, because of technology, because connectivity, because internet, because everything, things are changing, and we should make our discipline more open to everyone's. Why? Because we are super woke. Because the perspective of other archaeologists or colleagues that are not exactly like us will give us a different understanding of the past. So when we assume that the functional archaeologist is one type of individual, the rest feel isolated, feel that they cannot belong to a community, there's tension, there's that feeling of not belonging, there's that shame, and that feel of hiding yourself for protection, for all the things. So we need to acknowledge the presence that archaeology needs to be. Who is archaeology? Who should be archaeology? Everyone. I want to just do a quick shout out to archaeological.com, a great webpage where you can get these resources. Because if you look archaeologists for your PowerPoint in Google, we get one certain type of algorithm that looks specific type of individuals, or even just so. And illustrated where we have archaeologists doing that work, where we have CRM, and they're from different ethnicities, different races, different approaches. We have queer individuals, we have individuals with disabilities, we have individuals that are neurodiverse. So imagine how rich will be these types of interpretations, because we have all these different type of people telling us how they see the same evidence we're seeing, of course, within theory and within following the evidence. But all these minds thinking about something make the results and make what we can know way, way more. So, but it's also true that sometimes when we're not used to, because humans are individuals of beings, that we like the things that don't change. So when things change, we get this feeling of that's strange, that's odd, that's an unconventional point of view, unusually different, singular. And all of those are part of the dictionary definition of queer, a word that has been reappropriated but the queer community, but individuals that are LGBTQIA plus. They appropriated this word 30 years ago, probably a little bit more. And now it's this umbrella word for queer studies, LGBT studies, queer theory. So the way I see archaeology now is how can we incorporate all these different elements in our interpretation? How should we incorporate different point of views to archaeology? And that the answer for me is from a queer perspective. Why a queer perspective? And it's not an homosexual perspective. Queer perspective is a queer that is different, that it's breaking with the binaries, that it's breaking with the establishment. And that implies having this freedom of exploring our own biases, our own interpretations, our own understandings of our research. But what is queer theory? Academics say, people that study queer theory say that defining queer theory, it's purpose, because it cannot be defined because it's all those things that are not the norm. For example, queer theory has been criticized for being inaccessible and full of difficult words. Absolutely true. Even back when queer theory began, people were already asking whether it passed. Like a thing, and it kind of happened in 2000, we had an issue of war archaeology dedicated to queer theory, and nothing else until 2-3 years ago. People publishing here, there, in the Society for American Archaeology meetings, some papers, but people probably thought that it passed. But people was just researchers, there had to be a generational change. I'm not talking like old people, young people, I'm talking how the world has changed in general. The word queer also has many different meanings. Many queer theorists refuse to say that queer theory is arguing that it resists definition and it's possible to capture, and it is a discipline that refuses to be disciplined. I need a t-shirt with that. It works. In that sense, we follow queer theory challenges fixed and essential identities. Queer theory is not saying that we all should be gay. Queer theory is the approach that understands that fixed and essential identities should be challenged, because that's not how the world works. We cannot put the word and explain it in different boxes. Queer theory challenges fixed and sexual gender identities. We know that there's a gender spectrum. We know that sexuality is fluid. So the way we understand the past should be the same. Human sexuality has been there. Always, people have been curious since the beginning. And queer theory challenges the idea of normal versus normal. And that framework works for queer theory, works for queer archaeology, but I like to mix it out a little in the next slides. At the core of the explanation of queer theory, we have that you have a fixed sex, male or female, on which culture use a stable gender, masculine or feminine, which determines your desires towards opposite sex, same sex. Still very binary. But the reality is that we need to understand that we're living in a matrix that sees the world as binary. And we need to break that, and that's very difficult to do, even for someone. Yeah, I practice queer theory. I apply it to my job, and I don't know if you remember, I think last year we had the evidence in Peru of female hunters. And I was teaching a class and I was mentioning this example, and it was really, it didn't roll off my mouth, say like female women, the hunter. I did this. Because I was used to male the hunter, who like we all know. It was really hard just because we are not used to read that, see that, teach that. So we need to break out of the matrix. And the truth is that you have no arrows. You don't have to follow a path. A body, very different types of bodies. You may perform an identity. I am performing today the identity of a presenter. But I was in IKEA yesterday and I was performing the role of someone that was totally lost. And you may have desires, and your desires may change. And that's fine, because you evolve, because you know yourself, because whatever. So that's the matrix we need to follow. There's no straight arrow. But we need to understand that queer theory forces us to show us that there's something that is not already established in our life and how we see them. Then I like to change a little bit what queer theory is when we apply it to Archaeology. So we have queer theory, challenge fixed and essential identities, sex and gender, normal versus abnormal. And with all these, many disciplines are trying to queer knowledge, identities, and institutions. So how can we apply that to archaeology? Again, and I get this is the same, it's almost the same questions as, oh, you're an archaeologist, you work with dinosaurs. Oh, you're a queer archaeologist, you're looking for the oldest couple, homosexual couple. It's like, will be cool, but no. Queer archaeology, it opens about sexuality in the past. It forces to look to see the evidence that people in the past had sexual desires, and that's something that could be or could not be found to material culture. That's for the research question. It criticizes research that does not understand how problematic it is to see past society with our own lenses of Euro-American, Judeo-Christian, Western binaries. Because that's what we are. Because most of us have grown up in this, with these boundaries in this society. So this is how we see the world. Another example was a different conference about 3 years ago. And the archaeology was presenting the work, it was a domestic site. And so like, so we have an excavate here, but we have these domestic units. So we are assuming one family, mom, dad, and kids. And I was like, oh no, there's no way that for us to know exactly if we have an excavator, have more lines of evidence, that's by default the family unit that live from a society that we don't get to talk to. So we need to have that in the back of our mind when we write, because otherwise the default comes as something as simple as the warrior, the women that work with textiles. And usually those divisions don't usually work, sometimes don't work. And it's fine, but we need to break with that, and we need to assume that where our society is structured not necessarily follows the past don't necessarily follows the way we see our society today. I don't know if you have heard that's right, like it takes a village. So that we're referring that to raise a child. And in societies in the Amazonian rainforest, in Peru, for example, children are raised by the entire community. And that's that, it belongs to the community. Why are we not trying to apply that to archaeological contexts that are probably even more close to communities, depending everything geography. So we need to be careful how we are interpreting our material records. It challenged the idea of static identities. One was a priest. But sometimes we have the possibility to do archaeology and talk about personal histories, especially the bioarchaeologists. So things change. I was at some point studying biology. Now I'm an archaeologist. I'm a PhD in anthropology. So people change and that's fine. And when we talk about history, when we talk about individuals, that also should be in the back of our mind because it's and this is a more tangible example. If an individual has evidence that is diving to get certain mollusks out of the floor of the ocean, also societies, and maybe it also has some evidence of where some bones because of doing or working with the what? Yeah, with this, like this person was doing something and now it's changing and they both don't contradict each other. We need to remember those kind of things. Brings to the front the concept of gender identity that in archaeology and bioanthropologists here or online we don't know, we cannot sex individuals that are not older and it's a range and it's hundreds. If I don't mistake, it's male, possible male. We cannot say possible female. There's a spectrum of, in this case, sexes, but sexes don't necessarily match gender. So that way we are questioning normative approaches to archaeology. We are breaking that. And we are rethinking binaries, but not only from a sexual gender point of view, we need to rethink binaries, elite, non-elite. We need to rethink binaries with religious, secular, private, public. All these things that archaeologists, we love binaries because it makes our life way more easy. But we need to, that little voice needs to be here when we write and when we interpret things. Then the way I have redefined, I have not redefined queer archaeology, the way I see queer archaeology is that archaeology challenges fixed and essential identities in the past in opposition with just queer theory. Queer archaeology challenges discuss not only sex and gender, but also binaries in archaeological interpretation. Queer archaeology needs to be aware of our own Western Christian colonial, patriarchal, heteronormative, white supremacist biases, because we have them. And we need to be aware that we have them. This is how we move around in society. Then, what I will like to see in the board is like the queer knowledge also implies to acknowledge queer identities, to queer institutions and practices, and how we queer institutions and practices, not dressing everything rainbow, as my PowerPoint is, but as acknowledging the difference, the biases, and the binaries that we constantly have applied. And I mentioned abstract and at the beginning that queer archaeology, this change in archaeology in general, is coming from personal histories. It's not that happens a lot, that we have a bunch of archaeologists, we get together, we talk for 4 hours, and then we come up with something new. In this case, since we are individuals, that in this case, individuals that are not within the norm, are fighting, especially the new generations, for a space instead of hiding, were fighting from a space, and I can point myself at it. It's a personal story. As an archaeologist, ceramic typologies, I will excavate, do all the things. But I was interested in doing maybe feminist archaeology, maybe gender, nothing too controversial. Dabbing a little bit. And that was taking a toll on myself. I would go to the field as a queer person, and people would ask me about my husband. I was like, oh, he's great. And then I will not be able to form those connections that we sometimes have in the field with the locals. Not because I will select the people I work with in different parts of Peru, in this case, phobic and they're going to burn me in the main plaza, just because I'm, security. I need to feel safe. And in order to feel safe, I just kind of shut down and close down. So I was missing out of a big part of anthropological and archaeological experience. I will mention if I was dating somebody, I will be very careful when I will go to conference, and I will have my conference attire, because everything is related to gender expression, maybe. So in this process of constant change, this process of acknowledging how the world works, little by little, I started to encounter other archaeologists that happened to be queer, that were also interested in pushing, in discussing different issues, started to get together. And we started to create change. And that's the big thing right now. It's the same thing is happening with archaeologists with disabilities. Because we have hired our colleagues, because they cannot climb a hill if they have some movement, or they are made hard of seeing, whatever. We will just hide them. But we're missing a lot of stuff. There were people with disabilities in the past, for sure. How the way we can write, I'm not a person with a physical disability, cannot write something about like I'm reading, I'm understanding, I'm capable, I'm academic, but having a different perspective and sharing that. I'm not saying that we cannot write anything, but sharing that experience with somebody that actually has more invested, it will just grow our own research. It will grow our own interpretation of the past that we are offering to the rest of society. So then I, at some point, because I have all this great support system within our own discipline, small, but it was there. I decided, well, I actually came out of the closet as a digital archaeologist. I started to embrace my love for computing. And that's also not the way of doing archaeology. That's also a little bit outside the norm. You don't like to go to the field? Yes, but just short period of time. It means my hot coffee in the mornings. Fancy hot coffee in the mornings. So all those, I decided like, this is who I am. Yes, I am. And I started to form different connections, and my own archaeological practice grew as a digital archaeologist than just trying to follow from the ceramics. But I was meant to do these things. I really enjoy it. I can give a little bit of myself to this type of methodologies. Using the words of Jack Halberstam, the sheer impossibility of in his book, The Queer Art of Failure. The sheer impossibility of succeeding through normative model can push these unconventional scholars to take greater risks because they already occupy uncharted territory, and therefore, by default, take unconventional do-it-yourself, which in turn lays a trail for more conventional scholarship to follow. But I didn't invent queer theory or anything. I used the word of Chelsea Blackmore, Barbara Voss. And we need to ask ourselves are we giving and creating enough space to allow these unconventional scholars to show us queer ways? I'm not, and when I say unconventional again, I'm not saying LGBTQI plus archaeologists. I'm talking to any colleague that breaks out of the norm, out of the standard, the statistical standard. Are we doing that? We do that, or we just let things happen. Oh, now we have more people, women of color, people of color in archaeology. That's good. But are we creating those spaces? It's good. Well, I have a person with a disability. I am creating that thing. It's a natural process where you're being inclusive and we're hearing all the voices and we're being multivocal. And you can take this as a woke approach to academia, or you can take this as a, I don't want to, like, it's not a smart way of like, I'm taking advantage of the knowledge of my colleagues, of my peers, to better my research, to better my teaching. Redefining the way we approach redefining the way we approach archaeology from a queer perspective, then what it could mean. We need to reflect on what questions are we asking. Who's interested in these questions? Why are we asking those questions, that question? And for example, I am interested in, or a colleague of mine can be interested in, let's go with something very, very gender. So this person is asking a question, a research question related to war, to conflict. Maybe I am interested in understanding conflict in a society, how it affects females during wartime. And that question, more than probably not because individual, because people don't want to talk about women, it's because the way we are existing in this world, we think conflict, we think interpersonal conflict, we think like war. We're not necessarily thinking, especially for archaeology, for people back to the past, was there violence within like one society, within one group, against particular individuals? What are the markers of inflicted violence on children, women? Who is doing the violence? Who is doing the aggression? So all those questions are heavily related to our own experience, are heavily related to our own history, and heavily related with what is important for us. What is my research approach? What I am trying to say from a broader perspective, what I need to know about the world, all these questions have to do with my own identities, my own biases. I'm not trying to say it at all. I'm trying to just have one explanation that understands an entire culture and an entire period of time, or I'm incorporating different point of view, different questions to kind of build that up. And what I'm using one type of methodology, and this is also related with queer theory and queer archaeology. The standard way of doing archaeology is to do survey, research, or material analysis. And that's great. That gives us a lot of information. That's what we all have learned in class. That is what we all are teaching. And that's great. But maybe there's a different theory there. When GIS came up, not that I do a lot of GIS, I'm defending it, but when GIS came up, when the use of computer came up, like that's just like bottoms. That's not real theory. That's not real archaeology. But somebody that, for different XY reasons, can maybe not go to the field to do the actual digging, can give us a lot of information, can give us a lot of results, can produce a lot of different types of methodologies. I really need to excavate? Do I really need to do survey? Do I really need to? It all depends on your research questions, and we need to be open that that's a valid way of doing research. And also, who is answering these questions? How do we interpret archaeological context? Is this the only way to see this? Because sometimes we go to excavations and then we find something, and most of the time we say, like, oh, this is ritual. Whatever context, whatever thing we don't understand, that's ritual. Then the people that are working with us, the locals, say like, when I was little, we may have, this is an example, we've had teeth on a sleeping area. So like, burial death, what happened, and maybe, I don't know if you guys have grown up with this, you hide your teeth when you're little. Here is a,
Yeah, you know, a woman with wings comes and steals your teeth. I don't know. It's very strange. The whole idea is very strange.
so the way we are answering this question, the way we are interpreting what we are seeing needs to be by somebody else than us. Because what we know is what we see, and there are things that we don't know. So that's why querying archaeology, querying the field is basically having that little voice that tells you, it's not about that. Is that possible? In basic things like, is this a nuclear family? It's the basis of society. Why are we not asking that question? Chelsea Blackmore, amazing archaeologist, mentions in one of her articles that you consider. Feminist and post-colonial critique have recognized that science itself is contextual, and as such, it necessitates a critical response for those who exist on the margins of society. Because it gives us, everyone is the same, everything is the same. And these individuals that are on the margins of society because they're queer, and I say queer, following norm in any sense, have different perspectives that we are not taking into account, because we need to remember that we are trying to study societies that are not us. In a similar manner, querying the past forces us to interrogate our own assumptions and situated identities. Without such critical examinations, archaeology remains, consider this very harsh, but true, archaeology remains an antiquarian pursuit rather than an emancipatory practice. One that situates our epistemologies and refocus our discussion on analysis of difference. Oh yeah, this is different. This is something else. We need to have that in the background. Who exists on the margins of society? Who in the past forced us to interrogate our own assumptions, situated identities. Interpel, I'm talking Spanish here, interpeling ourselves. Is that Spanish? It's, we need to ask ourselves these questions, and this we need to think very hard about our own biases. So, we're finding the way we approach archaeology means to open the discipline to alternative ways to be an archaeologist and doing archaeology. And that means everyone is welcome. It means queer persons, individuals with disability, people of color, women of color, local archaeologists, host communities, and neurodiverse individuals. And this list could go on and go on. This is how archaeology should look like, because this is how society looks like. We're mixed, we're different backgrounds. So in order for us to create a discipline that incorporates different point of view and then it's aware of its own bias, is what it is, it's going to give us a better understanding. It's going to make us better researchers. We have more data. We need to actively include sexual and gender diversities. We need to open the preconceived notion that all archaeologists do the same. We need to incorporate multivocal approaches all the voices. We need to talk with the people we are working with. We need to talk with the people we are working in their backyards. We need to actively open the practice for disabled archaeologists, visible and invisible disabilities. We don't see it, that doesn't mean that they are not there, and different accommodations required, because it will be good for our research, not because of the good or hard parts, but still. In that context, with all this information, have any questions? You guys have any questions?
Well, let's pull up the chat here and see if we've missed any. But in the meantime, anybody in the room? And I want to thank sharing with us. See where I can chat up for you. Here you go.
Oh,
All right. Professor,
you want the last slide?
this one here?
Yeah, that's why there was. Yeah,
That
that one.
one here? Hope that wasn't the only question. All right.
So first of all, Gabrielle, thank you for that. I've actually got a lot of questions, but I'm just going to give you one, or maybe two if no one else has one. So in thinking about queer theory, and particularly your approach today, your perspective, I think I understand everything that you're talking about. One question that came up in my mind during your presentation was the central place of cultural relativism in anthropology. And I'm wondering whether the central place of cultural relativism in anthro has facilitated queer approaches in archaeology in a way, perhaps compared to other disciplines, because of that fundamental perspective of understanding that there are different value systems and different ways of thinking about things and so forth. Can you comment on that?
Once I did like a similar presentation, but we were talking about the theme of queer archaeology, and a person in the audience was like, then we cannot say anything. Close shop. But the thing is, that's why I mentioned we need to have that voice here. When we are writing our report, when we are writing our book, an article, when we are getting to a conclusion, we need, the evidence is telling us something. Our background and bias is telling us something. But we need to be aware. We need to make room for the possibility that what we are just assuming from the get-go might not be the norm. We need to have like a double take of the evidence in order to do that. If the evidence permits it, they say like, no, this was like a nuclear family, then I will not say like, no, but this person for sure had a, like, no, I cannot say that. But it's that voice that needs to be present in how we do research, that maybe this approach is not the only way. Maybe the way we are doing and thinking in binaries is not all, and have that possibility open. Because we might find a different solution, we might not. So that's everything is queer. Has the potential to be re-examined with different eyes. That's the.
Share any specific examples of times when you applied queer interpretations to your archaeological data that would have differed from traditional interpretations?
Yeah, this is related a little bit with working with the community. I work with satellite image, and I was using satellite image to identify abandoned and in use agricultural terraces. I got my $100,000 value of satellite image and spent hours looking at them, creating samples, creating training data, so the computer could tell me where it was. had my results. And I was talking with the community, it's like, this abandoned area, they left 20 years ago. So it was not abandoned as I thought it was abandoned in antiquity, yeah, during the colonial period or whatnot. And then I noticed that the plots of land that were closer to the land that were abandoned right now, that appear abandoned on the image, was probably the result of a different process of migration, changing economics. Not like everything that is abandoned is not used because they will, that was not the case. So I had to readjust, I had to rethink things because in my head, the binary was pre-Hispanic, post-Hispanic. It was in use, it was during the pre-Hispanic time. And then it came to change. So it forced me to see my data in a different way, to add a different variable, because it was not what I was expecting. That's just one example.
There's a couple questions in the chat. I don't want to ignore those either. Dr. Frank would be the first one, I think. How do you see queer theory and decolonizing being similar and or different in approach and goals? So I guess those, like, queer theory and decolonizing. How do you feel like you're being interviewed again?
That's kind of fire. So I think the colonization approach with the idea that we are breaking out of a pattern that we didn't create. And when I say we, it's because I'm proven it was colonists. Where archaeology is breaking the norm and acknowledging that things might be different regardless of colonial approaches. It's true that colonial approaches have is like a Christian way of seeing the world, and we have maybe like a patriarchal way of seeing the world. But I believe that the act of believing that things are not binaries, it's more related to queer approaches. I don't know where I'm looking at. This is not a camera. It's queer approaches are different in that sense to decolonial approaches, because also approaches have the potential to be way more personal. We will try to reconstruct personal histories, especially again the bioanthropologists when we do when they do biographic stories. That will be the difference. They're cousins. They hang out together, but they're used in different situations. And I hope that there's.
I'm sure it'll come up over and over again as we just talk. How can those with traditional American Christian Euro white supremacists adopt this type of framework in their work and research? And what should change in the field or work that they study? So, all right, go back to slide 1. Let's start over. No, I'm just kidding.
The first step in everything is recognizing our own bias. I have a lot of biases. It's not like let's make a joke. Okay. So the first step is recognizing that we have those biases. And when we write, we apply that to our writing with our grant applications, and we apply it everywhere. That's how we are wired. So how we can change it in that way, one bias at a time. And what should change in fieldwork or the way we study? I think here it's very interesting because I think that the way we do fieldwork, the way we embrace different methodologies is by inviting to the table people that think different than us. Because we're used to see one thing, we have what I call professional deformation. We only want to excavate, we only want to do survey, we only want to analyze ceramics, bone materials. There's a methodology that maybe we're not using. Archaeologists, we steal from different disciplines. Nobody's going to create a GIS software for archaeologists. It's like, it doesn't make sense from an economical point of view. But we take it from here and from there, and then we incorporate it, and then we change it, make it our own. I wish I could say the people that brought GIS or different type of methodologies to archaeology were outside the norm. It will be great for my research, but we don't know. But it is most possible that persons that are not set in their ways, that as Jack Haberman says, individuals have to navigate different things, trying to fit, so they are flexible. They resist in different ways. So I think that's the way of incorporating different methodologies and different approaches to the fieldwork, for example.
I don't have a question. I think I have comments because obviously I'm listening and I'm thinking, I also work with Indigenous communities. They are the workmen on my project. My comments, and I appreciate you open the story with how the archaeologists thought they were doing the right thing by empowering women, having to navigate local politics and local kind of cultural norms. In my case, where I work at a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is highly political. There's national interest at stake. There is this kind of machismo already that exists. So I am a woman, foreigner, archaeologist running a project. Where do you start to actually, because this push to, you have to work with communities, you have to bring in their interpretations or whatever. There are cases where, and I'll say this, in our case, we do have someone on our team that is wanting to do ethnographies with this community, and there was pushback. They didn't want to speak so much for the archaeology. Part of it is preserving their own jobs, not wanting to, because I get to go home. They still have to work with the government archaeologists or whatever. And so if they work with our project and go, okay, well, I'm part of the interpretation, I get to have these decisions and whatever, they worry that will actually affect them continue to work in archaeology afterwards. So there's only so much that they will. But the other thing too is knowing that I am a guest, I'm an outsider. And so to what degree do I speak for someone? There is this, you toe the line, right? Like, I want to bring you in, I want to ask you all these questions and help me interpret this, and what kind of questions would you like to answer, which we do, but to what degree will I go, well, I work with the Indigenous community now, so I'm going to tell you what they want, which also assumes that they're with this homogenous community, which they are not. Half are evangelical, half are like, they all have different opinions about what we're doing there and its importance. And so for me to stand up and be their spokesman, I never really felt comfortable with that because I was always a guest, So there are, I guess it's not a question, it's a comment of navigating someone else's community, working in someone else's country. And, so anyway, those are the challenges that I contend with. And I certainly see the importance of working with folks, but to what degree do I speak for them,
It is very complicated because I work in Peru, so I'm not a foreigner, but I work in Borachirí. And I'm from Lima, so I'm like, we don't have the same means of living. I'm also, I can navigate the cultural and political because I know where the elections are, and it's never a good idea to go close to elections because then the archaeological project becomes a actor in the political. But I think it all begins with incorporating the opinion of the people that are next to it. Instead of doing, I'm going to do an open house and have everyone's interpretation of my site on it. So it's in my head, it's very difficult because you're not part, you want to do things and people have present necessities. You want to preserve the site and they want to open it for tourism. So I think that's when we need to have a multivocal approach to our research, have like an anthropologist that work with heritage, that we need to talk with colleagues, we need to talk with local colleagues. which I think it's really a missed opportunity for everybody when an archaeologist come and don't talk to anybody and don't have like local students, don't have like local partners, because then a bunch of things happen that are not there. So I think it's more like a starting that conversation when it becomes usual to have other people's input. And I'm not, I'm not the, in Spanish, but no soy el dueño de la pelota. I'm not the only one that this ball is mine, so I don't want to play with you, and then I go. I think that's the main thing, to have it like little by little. And when your students see you do that, they replicate that. And then it comes to them, oh, they're come, because I have been guilty, fresh out of undergrad, with that, they said that ignorance is very dirty. Archaeologists, I have my permit from the Ministry of Culture. I'm going to excavate next to your house because the law is behind me.
Oh, yeah, it's 12:30, but it looks like, I don't want you to miss this question from Baron here. So can you say a little more about the intellectual genealogies that have contributed to the queer theoretical intervention in archaeology? They're giving you the big ones.
Teach a class on queer archaeology. We can, archaeology comes from queer theory, and that comes from the influence of feminist archaeology, gender archaeology, Black feminism, intersectionality. All those things are building how we have what I like to call like queer approaches to research in general. So that's kind of the genealogy. I was like Chelsea Blackmore, Barbara Voss for archaeology, absolutely. And then all the but it's reading queer theory could be challenging, and that's another thing. It doesn't need to be my paper is not like better if I use convoluted words. It's to be more approachable, so we can. I believe that I love your question because I think I have landed something that I've been thinking too.
Honestly, we talk in the trenches all day long. We're always, what is this? What would you, I guess it's to the degree that I come back home and go, well, I'm going to present the community kind of thing, but we're not. It's an ongoing thing.
There's not a recipe.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would have used it like a long time ago. Thank you for.
So it is 12:30. I'm sure that if you have follow-up questions, she's here now, so she's part of our department, so she'll be around. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Cheer. Oh yeah, let's.